Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Flores from New Braunfels Police Department. He has 27, just over 27 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to today's conversation. So welcome, Chief Flores. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Of course. Can you give us a little bit of background? Who are you? How'd you get started in law enforcement?
Sure. Well, my name is Osvaldo Flores, born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and really grew an interest in law enforcement really since I was a kid and went to school in Waco and got my first job in law enforcement with the Arlington, Texas Police Department and started there in 1998. Worked there for about 27 years, just 27 years, and rose through the ranks and retired there as an assistant chief to take the chief of police position here in New Braunfels, Texas. And really have had a great transition period here with the city. The community is great, and the employees are just so phenomenal. So just it's been a blessing to be here.
Thank you for that. And I don't know if you told me that you went to school in Waco, because my family lives out there. Did I tell you this?
No, you didn't. No, I went to Baylor University and got my undergraduate there. Mhm.
Amazing. Yeah, my dad, my cousins, they all live out in Waco, so I'm very familiar with that
Yeah.
area.
Oh, it's a great place. Yeah,
Yeah, well, and now I mean, it's grown so much, I'm
for
sure, from
sure.
when you
Yes.
knew it. But why, I know you said that you always wanted to be in this profession. Was there any particular reason why? Was there anything about this profession that really stuck out to you?
Sure. I think a lot of us come to the profession really for a variety of different reasons. Most people come into the profession because they want to make a difference, they want to help people. And I think you find that pretty common with just about many officers coming into this profession. But, I see this really as a calling, and I have felt this profession as a calling for me. And my parents are originally from Mexico, and they didn't have a favorable perception of law enforcement from their home country. So, one of the guiding factors, I think, for me in really wanting to do this was to help not only impact the profession, but also change perceptions of law enforcement because there's so much we can do within every interaction that we have with anybody to create a positive perception of our profession as well. So that was really a driving force for me.
Yeah, and that's a really important topic that I think every organization right now is questioning. How do you create more positive relationships within the community? How do you, create that partnership where you are supporting the community, but the community is also supporting you guys? And we know that that
Right.
also plays into mental wellness because if you have a community that doesn't have a positive perception and they don't have that support for you guys, then now your officers who are out on the streets are having more negative interactions on a day-to-day basis rather than that support and that thank you, and uh,
Mhm.
are there any strategies that you have found to be successful throughout your career to help encourage that positive partnership with the community?
I think building relationships happens one interaction at a time, and we really have to think of it more as a philosophy in terms of everyone that we deal with and everyone that we interact with. That's an opportunity to create a positive interaction as best as it can be. Right? We know we have a job to do. We know sometimes the things that we have to do isn't necessarily something that somebody might want, but we can do it in a respectful way, in a way that retains their dignity and the person that we're speaking with, regardless of the reason why we're interacting with them. But it's one of those things where building relationships isn't a checkbox, right? You've got to continuously invest in those relationships. And one of my close mentors of mine has always really told me that you're going to enter a crisis with the relationship that you have before that crisis. And that's really important. And that always stuck with me, both on how we interact with community members, but even more so how we interact with our own workforce. And I think that that's important because we're going to go through tough times, right? And the best relationship that you can have within your workforce, I think, will get you through those tough times. So, looking at every interaction and building those relationships over time, I think, is really, really important.
I appreciate that you said that it's not a checkbox, and you're exactly right that that takes more of that proactive effort to
Mm-hmm.
get in front of those things, right? To, like you said, every day you're working on this And we know that proactive effort, proactive wellness is always more difficult. But I think if we can look at it in that perspective of, how can we, in authentically, I
Yes.
want to say, like, how can we authentically put in the work on
Right.
the front end so that it helps when things do happen, and there's always going to be reactionary things that have to happen, whether it's, within the community or in the context of wellness, but it kind of softens that a little bit if you can have that authentic effort on the front end.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When we talked offline, you said that you made it a point to not say officer wellness, that it's really important for you to be inclusive of the entire organization. Can you give a little bit of context into that and why that was so important to you?
Sure. Our organization, much like any police department, is made up of dedicated individuals that are either officers or professional staff. The support staff within an organization is critically important to support the everyday operations of every officer who's out there. And so it's important that we kind of expand how we're really approaching wellness. And while there are some specific things that deal with officer wellness, looking at it from an employee wellness perspective is a lot more inclusive within our organizations. And let's be honest, there's things that our professional staff are either hearing or seeing or reading through reports that they too are affected by some of the things that we may be seeing on a case or an incident. And so we really have to expand our perspective to be more inclusive to our professional staff. Because they are, in my mind, this is really increasing not only the importance that they have within the organization, but the value that they bring to any police department.
Yeah, and I think that when you say that, like the thing that comes to my mind is that you guys are a team.
Yes.
How can you operate in a fashion where, like you said, everyone feels like they're a valued member of that team? And the reality is that you can't do it without each other. Like
Right.
you can't not have dispatch. You can't not have records. You have to work together as a team to be effective. And you said it a few times, and I wanted to call you out on this a little bit. And you said professional staff, not
Right.
civilian
That's
staff.
correct.
And do
Right.
you think that that has significance and importance? Do you think that that has changed the morale and the value that people are feeling by switching from the verbiage of civilian to professional?
Right. And absolutely, I think it does. I mean, I think that we need to more appropriately, um, you know, um, refer to individuals in terms of positions that really elevate their value in the organization. And there's research out there that indicates the difference between, calling individuals that are not sworn, calling them either civilians or non-sworn
Mm,
tends to have more of a negative connotation or even not as positive connotation as something like professional staff. And I do think that that's an important component because I want our professional staff to feel and to know that they are a valued member of this organization. And I think that terminology more properly aligns in my mind the value that I have for them and something that I want emulated within our organization. And so we made that shift, soon, even before I got here, because those were terminologies that I was using in the interview process. And so it's something that I noticed very quickly that it caught on within an organization. And I knew I was on to something here, and other police departments have done the same thing, but I knew that it was taking root here when I heard other officers referring to them as professional staff as well. And so I knew we were on to something there. And that's really where kind of the power of numbers to be able to kind of embed this into the culture of the organization. I think that's important, and we've seen some benefits out of that.
yeah. And have you had feedback from professional staff saying like,
Mhm.
thank you. Like I do feel more valued and I do because the thing that I think of when you say that it does feel like a you versus them if
Mhm.
you're using
Mhm.
different terminology and if you're using more of that team verbiage, I would
Yes.
imagine that that have a positive impact. But have you had someone say that to you that it was positive for them?
Yes, almost immediately. I mean, I think it was refreshing for them to hear that perspective. And it's important, our words matter, how we, what information we have, how we title our emails and things like that, or how we even speak to our team. And so typically when I push out information to the organization, it's typically team NBPD, right? I mean, I think that's where I want everybody to know that this is a team effort and we can't do it without each other. And so that just falls in line with that. So I got immediate feedback that was positive, and how much they appreciated that.
I love that. I know that when you came into this role as chief, you
Mhm.
came in with a 100-day leadership plan. What did
Yes.
that look like?
So, it really kind of just identified what my focus areas were going to be in the near term, about 100 days. Now, I did let them know, that was based off of the research that I had done and
Mhm.
people that I had spoken with about the organization prior to getting here. And so I wanted the team to know that there would need to be some flexibility because I may learn something after having an opportunity to understand how the organization works and what our processes are like, that there may be some adjustments that we make to the plan. But overall, it gave them kind of a picture of what it is I was focusing in on. And I was really focused in on four different areas. I was focused in on operational and administrative excellence. I was focusing on developing leaders, right? So leadership development was the second focus of that. Stakeholder engagement was my third focus, and really strategic planning was my fourth focus of the entire plan. And within those, there were some objectives or things that we wanted to accomplish within all of those that support it. And that really gives people an idea of where are we going. And I think that's what they're asking for our leaders, particularly in the law enforcement profession, is where do we see ourselves in 5 years? And so, I had some key questions that I was asking them, both either in person or in briefing. And I even sent out a survey and I was asking them, like, what works in the organization, what doesn't work. If you could change one thing, what would it be? And then I think for me, the most important thing that I was asking them was, what are your expectations of me as your chief? And it was interesting to see some of the feedback that was received. And for me, it's important that our employees know that if I'm asking something, they want to know that we're doing something with that. So, for example, the survey that we pushed out, we got a pretty good response rate. It was nearly 50%, which I thought was really good. And that closed on a Wednesday. Well, 2 days later, on that Friday, I pushed out a weekly newsletter that I tend to push out once a week. And in that, I had a summary of just the themes that were coming up. And what they were asking was for leadership, accountability, communication. They wanted to know where we were going, kind of what we were working on. And so that really helped not only drive my focus within the organization, but start bringing our executive leadership team on the same page about, okay, our employees are telling us that this is what they want. And really the thing that's most important to me and what I conveyed to them was that while I asked the question about what are your expectations of your chief, they're wanting this from all of their leadership team. And I think that is where you can really get some multiplying efforts, and really being able to address the concerns that they may have because they were very clear on what it is they were looking for. So that's helped guide me. There's been some things in the 100-day plan, which has been really nice because I felt like, even coming on board that I had been here longer than I actually had, right? And I felt like because they already had an idea of what my focus would be, that it immediately built that relationship. And so, but as I mentioned before, it's not a checkbox, right? We've got to keep continuously building on that. So, try to remain, available and visible and in work groups and asking questions. Because many people say, hey, my door's always open, right? But I think the important thing is that the door swings both ways, that
Mm.
we have to be out there and working with our team members and understanding what they're dealing with, so that we can make good decisions based off of good information that they're sharing with us. And so it's been exciting. Some of the things that we have in the plan, we've intentionally kind of pushed them a little bit further because there's been new things that have come up that weren't anticipated that we're working on because they're a priority.
Mhm.
And so I do think it's important that people know that we haven't forgotten about those other things, but that we're timing it out based on how we can get those other items and tasks done as well.
I think ultimately, as humans, we want to feel like we're heard and the things that we need and we want matter. And that could be in the context of, the organization, but also, in relationships, in our lives. Like we want to feel like we're heard. And so I really appreciate that approach of, hey, like, what do you need? What do you want? If you could change one thing, what would it be? And it sounds to me like it gives the it gives how do I want to phrase this? It maybe softens the fear of change too, because people are like, okay, they're hearing us, but then when you are giving the why, the what, the how, and you're presenting this plan as like, hey, like, because I think anytime a new leader steps in, there's always kind of that unknown and
Yeah.
the fear of what's going to be changed and what's going to happen. And so you're not only stepping in saying, hey, I'm listening to you, this is my priority, the why, the what, the how. And then now you're building trust and you're maybe softening that fear of change because I think that change can be scary, especially if you don't know what's going on. So having that transparency is say, like, these are the changes that I'm hoping to make and the priorities that I have, then it kind
Right.
of eliminates that question mark for people.
For sure. And I think it's important to be flexible too, right? Because sometimes we may have in our mind maybe some ideas of potential change, but then getting feedback from your employees, really from all the team members, gives you a better idea of how to create a better solution. We may have in our mind as leaders kind of an idea of the change that we want to make, but having their feedback and kind of in a shared solution model is really important because I think you'll have better longevity and better success as you're implementing change, knowing that people have had their opportunity to provide input into that.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this idea of in the context of wellness as well as like
Mhm.
normalizing
Right.
wellness. And you have a fairly large organization. So you have over 200 employees within your department. And we know that with anything, um, things are harder when you have more people that you're trying to focus on, right? It's harder to get the message out to everyone the larger the organization gets, and it's harder to do the things that we talked about where everyone feels like they're seen and they're heard and they're supported. What are you guys doing organizationally to normalize wellness and to provide resources for everyone?
Sure, it's an important topic, and I think that, and it's really exciting that in our profession, the tide has kind of shifted to where more police departments, more leaders within organization are talking about employee wellness because we have to talk about the issue because we know that not only the job that the individual is doing, whether they're sworn or professional staff, it can weigh on them both professionally and personally. And we have to normalize the conversation in order for people to be talking about it. We've got to create a system of networks in place that also creates peer support networks, which many agencies have, and peer support groups to be able to help people. But I think we need to continue to talk about it, right? This is the same concept as building relationships isn't a checkbox.
Yeah.
Building a culture of talking about wellness isn't a checkbox. It's not a program, it's a philosophy, and kind of how do you ingrain it into the culture. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is that, in my weekly newsletter that I push out to the organization, I always have a wellness corner. And I go around a wellness wheel. There's a graphic, and I just keep going around the wellness wheel every week. And we talk about things like physical wellness, mental wellness, spiritual, financial, and social wellness. Each of those topics is equally important. So every week we talk about a different topic and I bring up a different topic. And sometimes there are resources that people have that are available to them But one of the things that I think is most exciting for me is you never know what you're going to say at what point in someone's life that it might be what they need at that moment.
Right.
And I think the more that we can continue to normalize and make it a more common conversation, and I think that's probably a better term, making it a more common conversation, is that people will feel open to say, hey, I need some help, right? And we have a support network in place. But if they don't see that as the priority, as a priority for the organization, then they're less inclined to reach out when they're struggling with something, to ask for the help that they need. And so we really have to take a forward approach on this and be open to the conversation, even if it may feel uncomfortable to do it. And so, really proud of the network we have in place internally with a peer support group. And there's always room for improvement, right? There's always opportunities for us to continue to advance that. But one of the ways that I do that is through our weekly communication.
I really, I mean, it goes back to that proactive approach, right? And I think that in order to bring down those barriers and to start to break stigma, you're exactly right. It has to be something that's more normal and it's talked about all the time, not just when someone is struggling or after a critical incident, because then I think there's this perception of like, well, now you need it, or now you're broken, or
Mhm,
now, there's a
mhm,
problem. And so and there's always going to be both, like we talked about before, there's always going to be
mhm,
proactive and reactive measures that are necessary. But if there's more of that front loading of conversation and the message being like, hey, like you might not need this now, but it's here if and when you do need it. Because then it's not like you have to do it or I think you need it now, but it's like, hey, like we're going to talk about this all the time. It's going to be normal. It's
mhm,
not going to be weird.
mhm.
Leadership is going to
Yeah,
be on board with this. And it's there. Maybe you don't need it
right.
today. Maybe you don't need it tomorrow, but maybe next month you feel like you
Mhm.
do and it's here and you know that it's there and available. So I agree with you. And that takes effort.
Absolutely, and I think it takes intentionality, right? We've got to be intentional on how we're working through this and providing that information. But I think one of the exciting things that I have faced here is that now I've got sometimes that employees will reach out to me and say, "Hey, could you include this as part of your newsletter?
Oh, that's
Can
fun.
you include this as part of the wellness, kind of an update on our wellness program as it relates to this?" That tells me that they're listening to this, right? That they're hearing the message that's being passed on. And I think that's important because if we weren't intentional about it, we would never know. And I think I would much rather know, and have resources available for our employees to use.
I think that, a lot of times I'll hear they're like, yeah, like we send these things out, but we don't know if people are actually listening
Yeah,
or reading
yeah,
it. But to your point, people are engaging with it. And I
absolutely.
also think that it goes back to that old adage of like, if you could help one person, obviously you want to
Mhm.
help as many people as possible. But if
Right.
on that day you send out the newsletter and one person who's really struggling finds benefit from that
Mhm. Right.
takes it among themselves to get the support they need, then that's a win.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most powerful things that we could encourage within our profession is that, people understand and can relate to a story. So in particular, if there is an employee who has used a support network that's been in place and they're willing to talk about it, that's a powerful statement, right? To be able to say, "Hey, I used this and it was okay,"
Mhm.
right? "I used this and I've learned, or I've picked up different strategies and skill sets to help deal with some of the stressors of our job." People can understand that, they can connect with it. And I think the more that we can encourage that component
Yeah,
is, I think, taking it even further on this topic of employee wellness. It's one thing to use it, it's another thing to be able to share with others their experience. Because if others see that they used it and their experience was positive, as best as it could be, right, that it helped them, then others are more likely to follow suit when they need that.
I agree with you. And I think this is a community of people, of humans,
Right.
and I was always of the mindset. like back in my early days that
Mhm.
I didn't want people to know if I was struggling. Like I didn't want people to know the messy parts of myself. And I had an incredibly hard exterior and postured up and like I'm fine, everything's fine. And what I have found over time is that that is incredibly unrelatable. And
Mhm.
it's not helping anyone, including me. Like it wasn't helping me, it wasn't helping anyone around me. And through working with law enforcement, I actually had a moment where someone looked at me and they're like, "Tell me your story." And I was like,
Yeah.
"What? Like, what do you mean? Like I'm perfect. Like
Right.
everything's good, like
Yeah.
I'm fine, everything's fine." And they're like, "No, like, you know, I investigated you a little bit. I did some background.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a cop. Like, I
Yeah.
I looked you up, and they're like, "So tell me." And I realized after that moment that to your point, we're never going to be perfect.
Mhm.
It's never ever something that we're going to achieve. Although we may want that, I don't think that as
Sure.
humans there is perfection, but I also think that, by not sharing your story, by not talking about these things, we're isolating other people who are feeling those things because they're like, wow, like no one else around me is sharing their stories or talking about this. I must be the only one. I must be broken. And then there's that fear and that isolation, and then they don't raise their hand. And so I think the more
Right.
we can share those things and be authentic and vulnerable and not make it weird, to
Right.
like, or, and it's not shameful to say, like,
Mhm.
yeah, like I experienced this really hard thing in my life or on the job, and, I went and talked to someone and it helped me. Like, that doesn't need to be shameful. It doesn't need to be weird. I think it can be an open conversation and when appropriate. And I think that that's going to give people permission because they're going to be like, oh, I'm not alone.
The interesting thing is we've all gone through struggles, right? I mean, who doesn't, right? And so we know when we have dealt with our own challenges or struggles, regardless of whether you're a police officer or not, right? We know what it feels like to have to go through something difficult.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to be able to connect that way. And so, I feel like we're starting to make it more common and normalize conversations on this topic of overall employee wellness. And I'm hopeful, right? I'm hopeful because we can all connect with hard times in our own life that makes us more empathetic and understanding, maybe what somebody else is going through.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think that the future of wellness looks like in this profession? Like what is
You know,
next?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of opportunities in terms of what is next, right? I think it's coming from different angles, right? I think there are in our profession some legislative pushes that are mandating that we then provide resources for our employees. So that's one angle of it. I
Mm.
think another angle is that people are coming into the profession now with a lot more open mind and willingness to share, some of the things that they may be dealing with. And that's a good thing for our profession. We need that. And I also think that there's a technology component that we are starting to embed into the work that we do, both from a resource perspective, like, hey, there's this quick little, 3 or 5 minute video that talks about wellness, or there's a 3 or 5 minute video that gives you some tips on stretches that you can do to keep your mobility up within, if you sit down for most of your day.
Yeah.
I think there's that. And then there's also components where we are looking at, how many calls for service did an officer go on in which they saw someone, they had to deal with a death situation, right? I mean, how many CSIs went out to a call to have to process something of a violent nature? Those have effect, both in our hearts and our minds, and I think bringing in a data component to understand that gives us information to then just check up on somebody. Hey, I noticed you've been on 3 death calls this week. How are you doing? Right? I mean, I think those are the things that we know it affects us over time. And so my hope is that we continue to go down this path where we are checking in on people proactively and being intentional about it. I think that that will help not just their longevity in the profession of law enforcement, but it's going to help them thrive in retirement. You know, our goal should be not that an employee gets to retirement, but that they thrive in retirement, right? And I think that's part of what, you know, when I've talked to you know, new employees coming in, particularly new officers, as I'm talking with them, is while this is a profession and it is a calling, I feel people are called to this profession, and you don't run away from a calling. But I also think that we are defined by much more than our titles or our profession. And so work life balance for me is one of the things that I talk to them about maintaining, because they are defined much more than a police officer or a professional staff member. They may be, you know, a parent, a sibling. They may be a Sunday school teacher. They may be a little league coach. I mean, there's so many things that define us as people, and you really learn as you're getting into your you know, your latter years in law enforcement. When you get close to retirement, you start reflecting on what is it that defines me. So if we can do that earlier in their profession, it really helps balance out their work life, and it really makes it more fulfilling for them over time in this profession.
I'm so glad that you used the word thrive. And I just had this conversation recently, and I think that we have heard this expression of like, how can we get people to survive the career? And that was like the baseline, right? It's like, how can we just
Right.
get everyone to survive and like get to retirement?
Mm-hmm.
And then I challenge that to say, of course, we want people to survive, but the goal should be for them to thrive. There should be an elevation of that
Right.
concept, you know. Um, we should be striving for more than survival. There should be that next level of them like actually enjoying the job, actually enjoying their life. And to your point, you know, when you can thrive on and off the job, have that work-life balance, then that's going to seep into your retirement. That's going to extend your retirement. And if
Absolutely.
you have um, interests outside of this career, if you are not fully attached to your title, then that is going to help the transition into retirement. And you'll have that like second or third or fourth, whatever phase it is in your life,
Mm-hmm.
but that part
Right.
of your life that is exciting and can be as long as the career. But I think people do struggle with that when they're like, man, I'm just trying to survive and I've attached my full identity to this for 20, 30 years. And then we see the statistics going into retirement and the life expectancy because you feel like you've lost everything that you are, when in reality, you are so much more. And we
Mm-hmm.
should be raising that bar from survival to thriving. You know, you and I talked about this when on our initial call, and I think we really aligned well in this concept of like always growing and
Yes.
always trying to improve and do better. And there's a saying that I really like, and I know it sounds a little dark, but it's not meant to. It's meant to be inspirational of
Right.
if you're not growing, you're dying. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always try to live by that of like, how can we challenge what we're doing now to be even better? And I think it goes back to what you said in leadership of like having that open mind of how can we do things better? What is working,
Right.
what isn't working, and how can we raise the bar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's important because I think sometimes people think that if we're not progressing, we're staying where we're at, and
Mm.
you're actually regressing, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things where you're kind of getting left behind. And so we've got to continuously challenge ourselves to continue to not just refine and look for opportunities to do things differently, but that really continues to engage your mind on how do we continue to serve our communities in the best way that we can. You know, and I think, you know, we talked about work-life balance, and I think that that's extremely important, but there's some things as well that we can do within our profession that provides them a little bit of balance as well, even in the things that they're doing every day, right? I mean, and what I mean by that is that, you know, if you have someone that, you know, all they're doing is focused in on one element of this work, whether it's the law enforcement job of what we do of patrol and answering calls for service and those kind of things. We need to intentionally and really be intentional in trying to encourage their participation in things other than that, right?
Mm.
So looking for opportunities to get those individuals engaged in things like community engagement. Not only does it help in our relationship building, but what it's actually doing is it's giving a different perspective to people who may not necessarily do that every day, right? I mean, working midnights, there's not a lot of opportunities necessarily to engage with community members. So know that, be honest about that, and look for opportunities to engage them in other community engagement initiatives that are still within the scope of their work. That then creates a balance even within an organization, right? And that will help them see a different side of the work that we do, that really they start to feel more fulfilled overall and more well-rounded. And I think that that helps them. You're really thriving in the work that they're doing as well. So I think that's important that we demonstrate that, right? And that's why, I mean, I get super excited when I learned that my professional staff is leading initiatives that are community engagement related, because that's huge, right? I mean, it's a good opportunity for them to also experience a different side of our community and really create these positive interactions. So those are equally important.
I think my question for you is, you know, there's so many things that you talk about that you can do organizationally that are helping them to be well-rounded, to support their wellness. I know you talked about, leadership training and making sure that they have the opportunities to progress in the career. How do you support home wellness? And maybe not you, just maybe the idea of like, how do you create stronger families, or how do you make sure that they're taking care of
Mhm.
themselves at home? Because once they leave the
Right.
leave the organization, they're kind of on their own. And so, what is your opinion on, you know, providing education or resources so that when they are at home, they take advantage of those things too? I think it's such a
Sure.
hard challenge. So I'd love your insights on that.
Sure. I think one of the things I'm extremely proud of is, some of the same resources that are available for our employees are also available for their families. So
Mhm.
we know if they're struggling with something or need some help, that that's available for them as well. And it's actually available for our retirees here in New Braunfels as well. And I think that's really good for our retired police department employees. But I also think it's also an opportunity that we engage families in the work that we do, right? If we call ourselves a family and we want us to be a family within law enforcement, then we need to intentionally ensure that we are including, our employees' families in the things that we do. So inviting them to participate in various community engagement initiatives is one example that we do that with. I think that's a great opportunity, getting them involved in things. I was super excited. Soon after I started, we had kind of an annual award ceremony, and I loved seeing just all the families of our employees that were there. That gave me a good pulse of just kind of how integrated families are into the police department. And I thought that was great because we know that they're going to be, family members are going to have the best available opportunity to see if there's something going on, right? If there's something that we could potentially help with. And I want people to feel okay to say, hey, I need some help, right? And we're here to support, and it's not punitive, right? It's really trying to help people because we all struggle with things. And so I think finding ways to include family members into the things that we do is extremely important. So excited about that.
I love that you said that you are focusing on not just involving them, but also providing resources to them,
Mhm.
because we know I actually have a really funny story about this. This is like a total sidecar, but it's relevant. I was working with a police department, and there was a guy that came up to me, and he was an older gentleman, and he came up to me, he goes, "Hey." I was like, "Hey," he was like in the hall, and he goes, "Hey,"
Mhm.
and he goes, this wellness stuff isn't for me. It's not my thing. He goes, but I gave my app login to my wife, and now she's less stressed dealing with me, so we're both happy. I was
There you go.
like, all right, cool.
Yeah,
And that was
sure.
the turning point for me to recognize like the importance of supporting home wellness. And there's been tons of other stories too of, people doing this together as a family unit
Hmm.
and things
Hmm.
of that nature. But how can you also recognize that spouses are also
Hmm.
stressed, whether
Yeah,
they're raising a family or because of the stresses of being a spouse to someone who's in this profession. And so I love that you recognize that they also need resources to
hmm,
support their wellness. And then beyond that, the retirees. I think that they're often forgotten about. And we know that that transition can be tricky for some. And so,
sure.
how can you kind of bridge that gap, make that transition easier, and make sure that they still feel like they're a part of the organization? They still have access to the resources that you guys have. And I think that it still makes them feel like they're involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My final question for you,
Sure.
and then I'll let you take the floor if I missed anything, but what words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe
Hmm.
something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that you
Yeah.
along the way.
I think that we talked about the work-life balance, so I would really encourage that. But I would also tell them that it's okay to not be okay. It's
Mm.
okay to say that you may need some help with something, and that there are resources, whether it's directly within your police department or there are some community resources that may be available in their own community. But there are resources that are out there, and I think that there are more leaders of police departments now and their leadership teams that are extremely supportive to help individuals help their employees when they need it. And so I would just encourage them to say, hey, I need some help when you do, and know that you've got a team behind you, and that if we're going to say we're family, then we need to support each other like family.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your
Absolutely.
time so much. If I missed anything, I'll give you the chance to kind of take the floor and wrap it up, but those are all the
Well, we
questions
start
for you.
now. I appreciate it. No, we certainly didn't miss anything. I'm just super excited. I think that the more we can continue to talk about this topic of employee wellness, we can make it more common in our profession, and people need to know that we're listening, right, and that we are looking and being intentional on solutions to help support people, because we know that there's going to be challenges and there's going to be crisis that occurs, and so we just need to know that we can work through that as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Of course.